Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Lanny Davis-Frecker. I'm the president and CEO of Julie Billiart Schools. And we really created this kind of consortium between JB, J. Burke and Associates, as well as Hickman and Louder through Mary Jo O'Neill to come together and support our families and their journeys differently and a little bit deeper. So we got some feedback that the transition from JB or any sort of elementary school into high school is difficult for any child, but definitely has some more difficulties for our students who have learning differences. So today we will hear from all three of these speakers. We have Katie Bildstein, who is our assistant principal and director of special ed here at Julie Billiart Schools Lyndhurst, who started as an intervention specialist in the classroom, who is a wealth of knowledge working with the families moving on to high school. We have Janet Griffith, who's an attorney at Hickman and Louder, who has a vast array of information in the special ed and litigation and just some of those transition supports that can be in place. And then we have Dr. J. Burke, who you've heard or may know, and his candid responses to things are why we love having him on here and his real world experiences. We also have Jody Johnston, who's our director of academics and teacher development. We will have, we think, Mary Jo O'Neill, who's a parent advocate. And we have Kayla Santana, who is our director of marketing. So we have just quickly type your questions into the Q&A box. We have time at the end where we'll navigate those questions and we'll answer them hopefully organically throughout. But please use that resource, and we will also send out these slides afterwards so that you can use them and reference them as you go through these transitions in your life with your child. So I'm going to kick it off to Katie Bildstein to begin us off.
There we go. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking time to join us tonight. So the biggest question that I get here at JB is, where do I begin? And I think this is a question that can be answered in several ways, but really it's never too early to start. What we've learned through our students that have gone on to high school and beyond is that their success really depends heavily on strong executive functioning skills. Yes, it is important to work hard and get good grades and, pay attention in math and reading, but really honing in on those executive functioning skills throughout their day has shown to help them across all settings, high school, college, work settings and beyond. We definitely want to expect and have high expectations of our students, both at school and at home. So I know sometimes this can be difficult. I'm a mom of 3 myself, and many times it's easier for me to say, don't worry, I'll take care of that. If my kids are struggling with something, oh, I'll pour your milk, or, my kids are little, or, I'll clean up your room for you. But we really want to start working on having those high expectations from the beginning. Our kids are extremely capable of doing a lot of times more than we realize they can do. My 7-year-old could absolutely make her own bed. It may take her an hour and a half, but she can do it on her own. So really starting to hone in on those skills and having high expectations, having accountability, having the students be accountable for their actions. Whether it's, you forgot to study for a test, so you might get a poor grade, or you left your gym clothes at home, mom and dad aren't going to bring them up for you. Working on that accountability across the board. When we foster independence and self-advocacy, our students, we are not expecting them to just do it all on their own. We're not saying, okay, you get to 5th grade and you are on your own. Good luck with homework. Our kids need to be taught these executive functioning skills. So, instead of sitting next to them while they do their homework, maybe you are, cooking dinner, they're at the kitchen table, you can check in with them, make sure they're moving along, answer any questions they might have, but really start to expand those expectations. And we also want to focus on supporting their emotional maturity and regulation. One of the things we've noticed, especially post-COVID, is children across the board, whether they have special needs or not, tend to struggle with that emotional regulation. They, want things to happen in an instant. And if something small goes wrong, they tend to have very big reactions. All right. So in terms of those, social and emotional expectations, it's important to focus on teaching our students and our children to have smaller emotional responses. Obviously, if it is a big problem, there's an emergency, we expect them to be yelling and screaming and running across the room. But if it's, your pencil broke, it's not an appropriate response to cry and get upset about it, where there's an easy way to solve that problem. Working with our students to be able to ignore the small stuff. If another student is talking during class or, there's minor problems within the classroom, we want to start to teach our students to really ignore that kind of stuff. When they get out into high school and beyond, the small stuff isn't going to matter. And it's sometimes when they react to the small things, it creates even bigger problems. Our students, whether they're from JB or another school, are going to be in a lot of gen ed classes with typical peers. And we want them to be able to self-advocate. We want them to be able to fit in, have a good group of friends, have strong social skills as they move out of our smaller settings. And if they're able to have smaller emotional responses and ignore the small stuff, that'll help them. It's really important. And this slide is more tailored to our students here at JB, but it really fits with all kids. We always talk about JB's a little bit of a bubble. Everybody has known each other for a long time. It's a small environment. I think a lot of kids who are in special ed have those small classrooms, but it's really important for them to have social experiences outside of JB, especially with typical peers, whether it's music, sports teams, social skills groups. They need more unstructured time to help them figure out and work through that hidden curriculum. There are so many things that are part of that hidden curriculum that, we can kind of explicitly teach, but some of it is better taught by their peers. We always get a lot of questions about, specifically when to start, but we really look at it, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. So this is just an outline of some of the things that you can do in each grade level. In 6th grade, you want to attend those high school information nights. We have one at Julie Billiart every fall, but they have them all over the place, and this is mainly tailored towards Catholic or private high schools. You're looking in the 5th, 6th grade years, looking for general information. Does the high school accept the John Peterson or Autism Scholarship? Do they follow and provide the services on your child's IEP? When you go to a Catholic school or a private school, you do waive your right to FAPE, that free and appropriate public education. And what you'll need to determine is, do the services that this high school has, is that enough for what is on your child's IEP? Has the school accepted, or do they typically accept either JB students or students with IEPs? Start having conversations with your child. Ask them, have you thought about high school? A lot of our kids have not really thought about the, beyond the 4 walls or, 10 walls, whatever, of JB and what that is going to look like. Set goals with them. What do you need to be high school ready? We start to talk about that a lot, especially at the junior high level. What are some things that they need to work on? And the more self-aware they are of what they need to work on, the more beneficial. And continuing to work on those strengths and weaknesses. It's a good idea to start listing some potential schools, reaching out to us and your child's teachers if you need any suggestions. So 7th grade, again, go to those high school nights. Even if you went in 6th grade, go again. Participate in events at the high schools. A lot of times they have weekend open houses, or they have learn more about the school events, whether it's, go and visit for half a day, or, go to the robotics club for a weekend. Try and attend some of those events and see how your child feels when they're in that setting. Reflect on the goals from the previous year. And again, the more self-aware they are, the better. And the more honest conversations you can have with your child, the better. Have they made progress? Have they not made progress? What are some new areas of focus? And really talking to them about what will be looked at for high school admissions. Continue to have conversations with the junior high teachers and the administrators in your buildings and have honest discussions on strengths and weaknesses. And then 8th grade, this is the big year. You're going to attend that high school night, really start to narrow down that search. And you want to start looking for more specific information. What services are provided at the high school? How are those services provided during the day? Is it one study hall period a day where the student is pulled out for extra help? Is it integrated throughout their day? What services does your child need? You're going to look at the IEP, the ETR, discussions you've had. Again, there are many schools that might not have speech or OT within the school building. And even if it's on your child's IEP, that's up to you to decide. Do they need it during the day? Is that something you can do after school? Continue those conversations, look at high schools that you and your child are interested in versus what your child needs to be successful in a school setting. We have really good relationships with many of the area schools, and we're very well versed in what they are able to provide. Honesty between the parents and the school and why or why not a school might be a good fit or may not be a good fit. We want to set them up for as much success as possible and steer everybody in the right direction. So this list here does come from the diocesan high school application process. So our teachers and administrators are asked to fill this out for any student that is applying for a Catholic high school. It's the same for all of the diocesan grade schools. So it doesn't matter if it's JB, if it's JZU, any of the diocesan grade schools fill this out. But we thought it was important to show some of the things that the schools are looking for. They're really looking for, is your child willing to serve others? What is their academic achievement? But almost more importantly, what is their academic potential? We all know that our students can struggle academically. That's going to be very apparent with the IEP and ETR. But, are they consistently performing? Are they prepared for class every day? Do they have a strong work ethic? Even if your child is performing lower academically, are they working hard? Are they doing the best that they possibly can? Are they able to pay attention in class and be attentive during class? I know with my own kids, that's been a struggle with, all the screen time that they have, and especially post-COVID, but really trying to get as much out of their classes as they can. What kind of self-direction do they have? Leadership ability. I know a lot of the schools really pay attention to our recommendations when it comes to relationships with peers, with adults, respect for others, integrity and honesty. They look at the social and emotional maturity. And I know we talked about that in previous slides, and we'll continue to talk about that. Are they able to exercise self-control? And what is the family support of their students' education? So we wanted to give you just a sense of what the schools are looking for and why we start working on all of these things as early as we do.
Should I go?
Yeah, it is. Off to Dr.
Katie,
Burke.
that was really good. I'm impressed. That was
Well,
really
thank you.
excellent.
Thank
So
you.
let me just go from my perspective. My name is Dr. Jay Burke. I'm a psychologist in the community. We also run Perspectives Academy, our alternative school program, which is grades 3 through 12. And then we have PA Plus, which is for kids grades 12 and up, having some struggles with transition to adult world, which is something to think about because I think it's a whole continuum. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I love what Katie said. And part of the consideration, I think, should be as you're thinking about this, where your kid's heading in the long run. I know it's a little hard to predict, but what we're seeing now is a resurgence of the trades. More kids are going into trade school. That's kind of an interesting thing. There's a lot of school picks out there that are happening. So I'll talk a little bit about that as I go, but let me talk about making the transition. So I don't know if y'all remember your experience, but I called mine the Lord of the Flies. That's the LOTF transition. When you went from elementary school to middle school, they just turned you loose. And I went to Heights High School and we graduated at Blossom. We had 1,000 people in our graduating class. And that was just it. You went from elementary to middle to high school and you had to find your way. So I think it's way different now. There's a lot more things happening. And I'd like to talk about those for a minute. One is that socially kids aren't so nice as they were. Social media gets involved. Kids can pick on kids and make kids' life pretty miserable. There's a lot of great kids out there, but there's a lot of things happening socially that are different than when we were kids. So one is getting your kids socially prepared. And I know Katie was talking about that, but the big thing is starting that as early as possible. And I like what you said about mixing with neurotypical kids. I like the idea about getting kids involved in the community. There's lots of ways to do that. Because if not, kids learn sort of special ed social skills, as they call them, and they work in a specialized environment, but not as well in the real world. Let's put it that way. So one of the things we have to do is work on when kids aren't so nice, how do we deal with that? That's not such an easy thing for kids to navigate nowadays because it's in and out of school and kids have access to cell phones much earlier, et cetera, et cetera. Kids also have access to all kinds of info. So let me talk about that for a minute. I think that kids are more aware of things way earlier than we were. So we can use that to our advantage. For example, if your kid's looking at a school for change, you can go on a virtual tour, which is interesting. You can go on their website, you can look up information, you can watch videos about the school. There's all kinds of access that is there that wasn't available before. So that's kind of a neat way to think about how do you expose a kid to this? Because when you say, do you want to go to Beaumont or do you want to go to, Villa Angela, St. Joe or something like that? Maybe they do one visit, but it's kind of hard to get a picture of those kind of schools without really getting a sense of what it's like on more than one occasion. So one thing I would suggest is doing virtual visits and also spending more than one visit wherever you're looking at. Academically advanced. So I think it's really important when your kid's in an environment they're in, and if they have an IEP, so look at where they're functioning at. So they might be in 5th grade, they might be in 8th grade, they might be in 8th grade and doing 5th grade material. So what we have to look at when we accept kids into our program, for example, is, what grade they're in, but also what level they're functioning on. And when you are approaching schools and looking at different programs, I think it's important to ask what kids they take, but I'm going to give you a major tip, magic dust that I like to do, which is also ask them what kind of kids they don't take. Because if they're not able to service your kid because your kid is, say, in 8th grade, but in 5th grade language arts, and they don't have enough support, it's not going to work and you don't want it to fail. So I think that's important. If you guys are my age, 100 or older, you might remember vocational options. And vocational options used to be pretty sexist. There was, if you were female, you were going to go into cosmetology. And if you were male, you were going to be a auto mechanic. And nowadays, those vocational options have multiplied infinitesimally. It's amazing. And believe it or not, I have kids coming out of HVAC programs, heating and air conditioning programs, that are making more than master's degree staff at places per hour. And these are in demand. And some of our kids that are struggling with traditional academics are really great hands-on kids. And it's something to think about because the vocational programs generally are accessed through the public schools. And people ask me, for example, can your kid go to Catholic school the first 2 years and then go to vocational? And the answer is yes. You just have to hit the right dates to apply because it's competitive depending on where you live. And I can speak more to that if people have questions. So there's many more options of schools out there. As I talked about, we have Perspectives Academy, which is an alternative school for kids. And our drift is really the kids who need emotional and social support, maybe get picked on, maybe need more academic support. And we started PA Plus, and I'm not doing this to advertise it. It's in more of an interesting angle. Yeah, we've seen a lot of kids that graduate, and a lot of parents are not aware of this, and this is why I want to talk about this. If your kid has an IEP, they're good till their 22nd birthday in the system. Now, a lot of times the district wants to graduate your kid, but if they're not ready, to approach society and, for example, handle money, handle a job, handle going off to college, doing things, there needs to be a room in between, and they can socially graduate, but not physically graduate. And that allows you to still access John Peterson and Autism Scholarship. A lot of parents aren't aware of that. Okay, behaviors. Let me talk about that for a second. If your kid has behavior challenges, don't wait to get them managed. Don't think they're going to grow out of them. A lot of people say the pediatrician told me he'll grow out of it or she'll grow out of it. That's great if they do. But I suggest you check in with somebody, because what happens is they get bigger. They're harder to control if they have behavior challenges. For example, frustration with homework, anger management, emotional regulation. That's important to get handled early. One of the biggest tips I can give you is form a team. Now, the team includes, if the kid's a JB kid or maybe a different school, it doesn't matter. Whatever staff is academically handling things. Most of the kids are on medications, so the medication person, if the kid has a therapist, the therapist, oftentimes these people aren't talking together, and you want to get that team together to help decide what is the best placement and help for your child as the next step. Because sometimes we'll see them from different angles. My example would be, I run social skills groups, and a lot of times I see a kid in group acting very different than an individual session. And I can give parents different feedback. And again, a physician's going to have their feedback on medication, and the medications can change. So let me make a comment on this. So when your kid's going through middle school, they're probably going through puberty. And as they go through puberty, often the meds that help them focus maybe need adjustment. The time to do that is to stay with it while they're in middle school. Because by high school, you want to try to get those adjustments underway, because it can make a big difference. So staying on top of the meds, because I have people that come in and the kids in 8th grade going to high school and they've been on the same dose or whatever, but they're 100 pounds more than they were in 3rd grade. So medications are really important too. All right, if you could flip the slide to next. Okay, having conversations. As Katie said, they should be ongoing conversations. So please don't just bring things up, when it's like peak time. Now, ongoing discussions means don't do it when it's heated. Like, what I find is that people are upset or they're nervous and they're having those conversations at the wrong times. So they should be ongoing conversations that are happening. Address changes now, don't wait. Or challenges, sorry. So challenges might be if they're having trouble with executive function, which I really agree with what she said. Executive function becomes a major issue the older you get, and there's less support for it. So having them make their bed, having them do their homework, having them do things. It amazes me how many high school kids I have that have no chores. And the answer from parents are, it's easier just to do it yourself. And the answer is true, but you're going to pay for that later. Okay, next comment. What is your measurement, themselves or peers? This is super important. If you're taking notes, please think about this. So if you're trying to say, is my kid doing better? This can be a tricky item, because if you measure Billy against Billy, he may be doing way better than he was academically or socially, but is he keeping up or gaining on his peers or falling behind his peers? So sometimes parents have a skewed vision of where their kid's at because they see progress of their kid against their own kid, but they don't see them against their typical peers. My next comment is don't get too comfortable. So if you're a Julie Billiart parent, please be aware you are in a great place. And I'm not saying that just because I'm speaking with Julie Billiart tonight. It's a great place. And you may find other places where your kid's in a system and it's going great right now. And what happens is if your kid is in, Beechwood schools, let's just say in their middle school or something, doing great, you may have a great team, there. But then if you switch schools, all of a sudden you switch teams. And so don't get too comfortable with what's happening. Now, what I suggest to people is that you have meetings and you schedule meetings and you want to not overwhelm the other facility or the school you're going to, but you want to make sure the fit's right. So what are your kids' needs? How and when do I select a school? So it's an ongoing process. And I would say some kids need a specialized setting. This is important to talk about throughout their elementary and middle school years and high school years. And some kids move on. So they get skills and they're not in that setting. For example, we might have kids in our program might be there a year and then move on to a different setting because they've built a set of skills. So you're always measuring, are their skills improving? Are they ready to move on? Do they need this type of setting? And use summer camps because camps help kids grow. JB has a camp. We have 3 camps. I'm just going to mention them real quick here. We have a social skills day camp. We have a Perspectives Academy camp for 18 and up transition. Actually, we're taking 16-year-olds this year. And we also have an overnight camp that does social skills for 10 days. But there's a zillion camps out there, but be aware of what kind of camp you're choosing because some camps are very regimented. Some camps are just run by high school kids. And what I find is some of the kids with special needs, if there's not somebody there who's running the camp with expertise, the kids run into trouble because they're getting picked on or something's happened and there's nobody there to help them work through the situation. So although we want them to merge with neurotypical peers, we also want some supports in the system to help them. So if people have questions, I can go over camps. There's a lot of great camps out there that do good support for kids. All right, next slide, please. So I'm kind of famous for magic dust. That's what people want. So let me give you some magic dust tips to give your kid as they go on to high school. No matter if they're a Julie Billiard kid or not, it doesn't matter. First thing I tell kids, if you don't know what it is, don't say it, ask your parents. You cannot believe how many kids I have that get in trouble in high school within the first year for saying something totally inappropriate and they have no idea what they just said. Okay. And maybe it's, kids have so much access to things on the internet. It's amazing, but be aware that happens. Number 2, be realistic. So kids are getting exposed to pornography, swearing, inappropriate websites, etc., much earlier than before. So you want to be talking to your kid about this before they're on the bus with another kid showing him something that they get in trouble for. Because again, a lot of referrals that come to me, the kid ended up in trouble and they don't even know what they did. So join something with a life. So what does this mean? So I have parents that are saying, well, my kid's involved in the community. I go, what's your kid doing? Taking swim lessons. I go, okay. They're taking private swim lessons. Well, there's not really a life with that. I mean, it's nice that your kids learn to swim, don't get me wrong. But a life means an activity, for example, like marching band, drama club, things like that. As soon as they get to a high school, if they're involved in those groups, those tend to be nicer groups of kids. And they have things where they're getting together before or after school, and they immediately have a group of friends that they can do. If they're athletic, great, get them on a sports team, or maybe make them a person who works with the team as a statistician or something like that. Okay, if they have an IEP or 504 plan, I hate to say this, people are probably going to boo me. Maybe Julie Bill, people are going to be mad at me. I don't know. But hey, they're just paper. So what does that mean? You can have a great IEP and a great 504 plan and go somewhere. Now, remember, if you go with the public school, they have to honor those plans. When you're in a private school, there's different rules to the game. But the bottom line is that you have to make sure that they honor that IEP. And there are times where a teacher's going to say, I don't care if you have anxiety or not. Here's an example. I have a kid that has really bad OCD. His hands look like World War III. And he wipes himself with Clorox bleach wipes to get off of germs. And it's really horrible. And I got him to use a fidget and got it in his IEP. And one teacher was making fun of him for using the fidget in their class in high school. And that was really a bad situation. So you have to be involved with the school. You have to let them know you're involved. And believe me, if you're an involved parent, the school pays more attention to that IEP and 504 plan. Let's put it that way. What's the social mix? So helping your child get involved socially. I did recently in my groups, we talked about bullying, and there was some fascinating research. They found that kids that get bullied the most are kids that are trying to reach to a social group that they're never going to achieve. And having them find, like, if they're a B or C kid in the social stack, that's fine. Have good B or C friends. So help them with the social mix. A lot of kids nowadays are only on electronics. They're not getting together with any friends in real life, and that's a problem. For example, Discord. If you're a parent and you don't know what Discord is, look it up, because you should know what Discord is. Discord's basically a gamer server where I can create my own server and people could talk and I can rule who's in, who's out. And this can be a good thing or a really bad thing. So be aware of what your kid's doing on the internet. Social skills groups. So as I said, we run 15 social skills groups. Julie Billiart builds in social skills. A lot of schools build in social skills. But be aware that clinical groups are different than school groups to some degree. They're going to cover different content, and they should, because of the privacy and clinical nature of a clinical group versus what a school is doing. So if you have listed your kids doing a social skills supplement on your IEP, be aware of what their focus is in that group, and also be aware of what kind of kids are in there. If your kid is the highest functioning kid in that group by far, it's probably not a good fit. And you want to make sure they are getting the appropriate social skills that they need. Okay, no problem, it can be a problem. This is really weird, but something to think about. If your kid is not being a problem to the school, they still might be a problem that they're not growing or moving forward as they go through high school. So what I mean by that is that if they're not throwing chairs, F-bombing, bringing in stuff they're not supposed to bring in, the school may not call you, but that could still be a problem, because you want to watch your child's progress even as they go through high school. Because remember, at the end of high school, if they're not ready to operate on their own, what's next? And as I told you, that's limited opportunities. So the goal is from day one to get them ready to launch. And I'll give you this last parting thought. When your kid has a behavior at home or you're dealing with challenges, ask yourself, if this was not in my house, how would this be dealt with? Would there be support? Would kids be supportive of them, etc.? And so really, that's the goal of all parents, is to get your kids ready to launch at whatever level they're going to launch at. So that's my part, and I will drop it there and let the next person go.
Okay, I think that's me. So hi, my name is Janet Fleck Griffith, and I am an attorney with Hickman and Louder. Unfortunately, Mary Jo cannot be with us tonight. But I'm going to talk to you guys about transitions from my perspective as an education attorney that works in the IEP and 504 and discipline world a lot. So the first slide here is just some considerations as you're transitioning from elementary to middle school to high school, some sort of best practices for those transitions. Oh, sorry. So first, you should have an end of the year meeting. And typically this is happening anyways. You sort of should be getting together at some point towards the end of the year to be talking about ESY. But when you're transitioning from one school to the next, there should be a transition meeting where you're really talking about that transition and you're spending some time on it. If possible, you want to see if some staff members from the school that they're transitioning to can be part of that meeting, because hearing that exchange of information firsthand is certainly valuable, and it gives them an opportunity to ask questions of their current educators on how they're handling certain situations with that student. That meeting, you may also need to amend the IEP for that new school setting. So certain the services and the accommodations your student is receiving in their current school may look a little different in the next school because it is a different school with a different student population. So there may be some tweaking that needs to happen. So you want to be aware of that. And then one thing I sometimes recommend, depending on the student's profile, is to anticipate having a check-in meeting at the beginning of the next year. And what I mean by that is a meeting that's about 6 to 8 weeks after school starts. You want to get them through the transition, sort of that honeymoon period and excitement of the beginning of the school year, and see how they're settling in, and then call a meeting with their school team to check in on the student and how they're doing in the new school setting, because those transitions can be tough and they can begin to experience their disabilities may manifest differently in this new setting. Things that were working before may not be as effective in the new setting, or you may see some slightly different behaviors. So I think it's not unreasonable and certainly a good strategy to ask for a check-in meeting when you've gotten 6 to 8 weeks into that new school setting. So some things to consider as you go into that end of the year meeting, as you're preparing to talk with the school team about how that student's been doing throughout the year and what that school team sort of anticipates as they're transitioning to a new school. So here's kind of a short list of different things you might want to think about in terms of the next school. How will the environment be the same and different, right? So as we're progressing from elementary school to middle school to high school, we're generally progressing to larger school environments with larger student populations. What will that environment look like? Another thing to consider about environments is like, what are their calming spaces look like, right? If you have a student that really benefits from breaks, what will their breaks look like in that new school setting? I have like a very ADHD sensory seeking kiddo, so he needs like movement-based breaks. He's in a setting right now where there is a sensory room that he can access. When he moves to his next school, there may not be a sensory room, right? So how is the environment different? And what sort of changes might you need to make to the IEP to account for those differences? Academic demands, as the students are progressing through school, their academic demands are constantly changing and their academic demands will become more challenging. Oftentimes we see students that have like ADHD or other executive functioning needs, and they have done well in elementary school, and then the academics become more challenging and that executive functioning starts to surface, right? So just sort of consider the academic demands. This may be a good thing to calibrate 6 to 8 weeks in, right? Like during those check-ins once they're in the new environment. Think about the number of transitions. When they're in an elementary school setting, they may not be transitioning much at all, except for to specials. As they progress, they're going to start transitioning for almost all of their classes. So if you have a kiddo that's struggling with transition, sort of think about what can be done in that new school setting to support them in their transitions. And then to continue to build independence in transitions too. Building navigation sort of ties into that. Staffing. So a good example here is where in elementary school, you may have like one counselor or a smaller staff that is addressing counseling and behavior needs. As you move to higher grade levels, you might have a larger staff. So it might be a counseling office, right? And you want to orient your student with that. Instead of having you go to Mrs. Smith for those sorts of needs, you might have a team like a counseling office. So you want to sort of think about how the staffing is changing and prepping your student for that. The lunchroom. This can be like the most exciting and overwhelming space in a school, particularly in the public school setting. So you just want to think about how, if you have a student that's I think my students that struggle a lot with this is students that have sensory sensitivities to like lights and noises, and how might that setting be different? What are they doing anything in the current setting to help them in that environment? Do those sorts of supports need to transition to the new setting? Electives and extracurriculars. So you guys kind of touched on the good advice of getting your student out into other extracurriculars sort of outside of the JB school environment. As you're moving up through middle school and high school, those opportunities become broader and there will be more available. So you want to tap into those to help explore your students' interest and to help them integrate with peers. And then integrated athletics. I'm seeing some schools that are offering integrated athletics as part of their athletic program. So if you're lucky to be in a school district like that or attending a school like that, this is a great thing to tap into. So those are the sort of considerations that you'll want to think about. And you're just sort of envisioning like, how is this school going to be different? How is it going to be similar? And how are we going to transition their support successfully? The other thing I want to offer about transitions is there's this tug between needing to fade their supports as they become older, right? Like things like self-advocacy, right? As your student is becoming older and the social dynamics change, I often have students that are like experiencing bullying in middle school. They're not going to anyone, right? Or like they're struggling with that advocacy and when to do it and balancing the desire to advocate and seek out help with the social dynamics of seeking help, right? So as you're building your students' self-advocacy skills or you're building their executive functioning skills, you also want to be fading when it's appropriate so they can be as independent as possible when they finish high school. Balancing that with the need to be stable as they're transitioning to a new school. So that's not a great time to drop out supports. Let's transition them, get them into the new school setting, get them comfortable, and then continue with any fading that you've been doing. We've talked a little bit about like executive functioning and things like planning and time management, right? Like these are great things that we're going to want to continue to build and build them towards independence as much as is appropriate for that student's profile. So sometimes the things I'm asking for that aren't necessarily being offered in IEP meetings are working in a planner, right? And these are things that JB is probably doing, I know is doing a wonderful job of helping your student with, but just thinking about as they get older, their ability to do these things independently. So oftentimes the school will say something like, all of our students get a planner, right? Okay, but this student probably needs extra support using the planner and actually executing that utility and time management. They might need some support with time management and then feeding them to sort of doing some time management on their own. Where they were getting support with chunking assignments before, we might want to start supporting them with understanding the concept of chunking and doing some of that on their own. So balancing the need to fade supports, but keeping those supports as stable as you can as they're transitioning school environments. We've talked about social emotional dynamics. I always list it because I think we can get hyper-focused, particularly in the public school setting, on academics in our IEPs, but social emotional supports are definitely valid. And I encourage you parents to always ask about social emotional supports, particularly because social dynamics get complex and students tend to talk to their parents less about them as they get older. So I think social emotional supports are always a valid IEP consideration. Transportation, as you're switching schools, if you're in the public school setting, you want to ask about transportation and walking the schedule before school starts. So depending on a kiddo's profile, I oftentimes will ask for the student to be able to go to the school before a couple of weeks before school starts and actually walk the building and walk the schedule. For those of you that are exploring sort of multiple schools, a school tour is always super helpful, being able to like be in the environment and think about your student navigating that school and how they will do with that. But certainly once you've settled on where that student is going next year, you may want to consider the ability to walk that student's schedule before school starts and to just get them comfortable and reduce any anxiety about those first few days in the new setting. All right, so moving on. Okay, so here I just want to talk a little bit about high school transitions, and Jay alluded to this already. He sniped my big reveal that if you're on an IEP, you
Sorry.
That's okay. It's good information. And I love that when people know this, because I think it is something that flies under the radar. So if you're on an IEP, you have the ability to stay in this public school system until you turn 22 or you graduate. So oftentimes that IEP team is just focused on sort of that typical graduation timeline, but it's important to know this, particularly if you have a student that needs to continue to build their independent living skills and vocational skills. Staying in the system gives you the ability to access more through the public school. There are a couple of different types of assessments you might want to consider as you're progressing to and through high school, transition assessments and vocational assessments. Those will help you just a better focused look at what sort of supports they may need transitionally and vocationally. For a student that's on an IEP, the law actually says at age 14 and age 16, there has to be like specific purposeful check-ins on transition planning. So at age 14, you have to start talking about transition planning. And at age 14, that focus is on studies, like what sort of courses they can be taking to help support that transition to adulthood. So you have to start having that conversation at age 14, and you will start filling out a statement of transition services. At age 16, you begin to focus, shift the focus from studies to also talking about transition planning. So again, you will review and revise the statement of transition service needs. And then you will have a statement of interagency responsibilities. So at this point, you may actually see, and you should see, more people coming to the table, because now you can start folding in some of the agencies that can help support your student as well. So the disabilities board or other agencies like that, because those agencies will have supports that aren't in the public school setting, but are important for that transition to adulthood. And then you'll also want to look at the student's capacity to be employed in the competitive environment and what that landscape looks like depending on their profile. So this, I already alluded to the next point, including the appropriate agencies. So when you're getting to like age 16 and you're starting to really talk about post graduation life, you're gonna have more agencies at the table. Those agencies will be able to help with things like life skills training, things that you're not necessarily going to find in the school setting, but things that your student needs to thrive as an independent adult. And then student participation. So your student's needs to start being involved in their IEP, right? This is also that independence that we're working towards. They're required to be invited. So you'll want to think about student participation. The IEP team is going to start asking for them to be there, so don't be surprised, but also think about whether there's conversations that need to happen without them in the room. So it's not uncommon that I will be prepping a family for a meeting and they'll say, oh, the school team says that our son needs to be there. So we're like making all these arrangements and la la la. And I'll say, that's fine and that's okay. But you may only want them there for the beginning, and we can ask that they, address the IEP team and then be dismissed to go back to class, because there may still be things that you want to be able to discuss amongst adults that would be sensitive to discuss in front of the student. And oftentimes, if the student stays for the entire meeting, I will find that parents are wanting to express something, but they don't want to say it in front of their student. So you'll want to sort of balance the student participation so you can still be productive and transparent in the IEP meeting. And then the last thing I like to point out about when your student's turning 18, because this can catch you by surprise if the school team doesn't mention it, is once they turn 18, they're the ones that sign their IEP. And for some students, with more pronounced needs, it may be necessary to explore guardianships or limited guardianships related to sort of which will shift the responsibility of who is signing certain documents. Okay. All right, so this slide's a little hard to see, but the purpose of this was just to show you guys what that transition paperwork looks like, so that it's not a surprise the first time it lands in front of you, in the different areas that you will be working through with your IEP teams when you get to this point in your student's life. So the post-secondary transition training and education, the competitive integrated employment, and independent living. So these are the different areas we're going to be you would be covering when you get to this age level. And I can go to the next slide. And then this is where we talk about our post-graduation plan. So What do your accommodations look like when you're transitioning into vocational school or college? It's important to know that IDEA, which governs IEPs, only applies in the K-12 setting. So once you move on to college, you wouldn't have an IEP. Sometimes people call it an IEP, but it's really, those accommodations fall under the Rehabilitation Act, which is what governs the 504 plans. So that's where you would be entitled to, your student would be entitled to those supports. And so you'll want, as you're reaching out to colleges, you'll want to ask them how they support students that have been on 504s and IEPs and what that process looks like. As you're preparing for college, and if your students taking things like ACTs and SATs, if they need things like extended time or small group testing, you'll want to check in to see what the process is for securing those accommodations for the ACT and SAT. Some other considerations when you're thinking about college, what your student, think about your student in terms of the size of the city, sports, arts, art, extracurriculars, their interests. Is that university going to be able to provide those things that are of interest to them? Are they going to be in a setting that they can navigate comfortably? Think about school visits. We list Notre Dame and Kent here because these are local schools that help support students that have learning needs. And the other thing here is the exit IEP. So as your student is graduating, you'll want to have an exit IEP with the IEP team, and you'll want to talk about really like what accommodations are really important to them, right? So you have that list of accommodations when to take to the next school and say, hey, these are the accommodations our student was using. These continue to be of need to them. And then the last 2 points I think we've covered, exploring vocational or technical schools. I agree that there's been sort of a resurgence of these. I like that we're thinking in a more diverse way about what our students' future is and what is the best next step for that particular student when they graduate from high school. And then independent living, again, depending on your students' needs, what sort of supports do they need around successful independent living? So I think that covers everything that I have for you guys today. I'm happy to answer any questions. I did want to say one more thing about social emotional, because I think sometimes it can be hard to advocate for these sorts of supports if you're not at a school like JB. But if you have a student that struggles with social emotional, particularly students that don't pick up on social cues, I think it's really important to be asking for those supports. I love things like school-based social groups because school is a unique environment that you cannot replicate anywhere else. You will never have 25 same-age peers in your house with an adult that's not a parent leading them or having lunch together. So that is a really great opportunity to have some good social groups with students in their community, which I think is an important thing. But just continuing to build that, because sometimes I see students that will be in middle school or high school, and they're trying to gain the acceptance of peers, but they don't understand the social dynamics and cues, and they can end up in some really difficult situations if some peers have led them to do things that they didn't quite appreciate the repercussions. So I think, again, just another plug for building that social skills.
So much, Janet, and to Katie and to Dr. Burke, thank you so much. This is really the portion where we get to ask some questions of our panelists. And please feel free to put them in the question and answer box. And while we're seeing if there's any questions, we have our last speaker series event in Akron at our JB Akron School on June 7th. And we were hoping to talk a little bit about the workforce development and integrating students into the workforce. We're still working on a couple speakers there, but we are always open to shifting based on feedback. So please let us know what topics, what speakers you feel are relevant to bring in. And we would be happy to look into that. So when you get your survey and when you get the slides, please respond with ideas for that. We had one, it was more of a comment. So great, props to our.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Janet, can you explain integrated sports so people are familiar with that? I think you should elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. I haven't had a ton of experience with integrated sports, but I was recently at a school district where they offered integrated sports as part of the extracurriculars offered through the school. And so integrated sports are sports in which peers with students with special needs are actually on teams of students like your typical developing peers. And they are on a team together and they play it's like a league with other school districts that have integrated sports teams, and they will play that particular sport against other school teams. It's a really, in my opinion, wonderful opportunity.
That's great.
For for those peers to be working together. I think it builds skill sets for both types of peers, and can it just be like a very empowering, beautiful situation for a student with needs that maybe hasn't been able to participate in some more traditional extracurriculars.
That's a super idea. Yeah.
So we do have a couple questions. The first one was, can you please spend a bit more time speaking about the social graduation? And if you could share more about the type of student that this may be appropriate for. So I'm not sure if maybe Janet, that might be a question that you can answer.
Sure. So if you have a student that you've worked with the IEP team and to stay in the school system after their traditional senior year through age 22, one thing that you can ask the school for is a social graduation. And this is a graduation where they will walk with the rest of their peers. They get to have that social experience, sort of that capstone on their 4 high school years, but they will continue to be in the school system. And oftentimes, not necessarily in the high school, they may actually be going to community colleges or accessing supports and classes and life skills trainings through other organizations, but they're still doing that through their IEP. So it is a nice transition point because they get that experience. They get to have their family come and watch them graduate. And then the next year, they may not actually be in the high school very much, but they're still getting the benefits of an IEP. Students that we explore this option for, I think those tend to be students that are still building some academic skills, right? So students that need that continued academic support or and probably more often students that really need to build some solid life skills and some skills to tee them up for things like vocational training. Maybe they're actually taking some vocational classes through their IEP in their school district. So I think these are students that are just need some additional foundational supports to be successful as an adult.
Hey, can I add something to that, Jody? Is that okay?
Yep.
Certainly.
Yeah. From our experience, I would just think about it this way. I'll just be direct with my magic dust. Once your kid graduates, the adult services out there are very far and few between. And they are hard to access. And once you get a good worker, they may, from Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, for example, hopefully you can keep them for 2 weeks and they stay with you. Because it's a great program, but hard to access. So with the school districts, backing, there are many options that are available. And I would say it's not just kids academically, it's socially, it's vocationally. But the only thing I would add to what Janet said is, you have to have a plan for what that's going to look like. Now, speaking from my experience, oftentimes the school is trying to have that kid graduate. And, as a parent, you're surrounded by 15 people in the room saying your kid should graduate. And that can be very intimidating if you don't have a Janet sitting in the room with you. So I always tell parents, bring somebody with you and don't sign anything on the spot. Stop and think about it and consult somebody, because, you know, there are a lot of pushes and pulls that go on in these situations. Remember, once they graduate, you know, if they don't have skills enough to get along in the work world, the academic world, or whatever it is, you're their main support, and that can be tough sometimes.
Okay, thank you.
And I do agree with that sense that the school team's just ready to progress them to graduation. And the social graduation can be a nice solution to that, right? Like, if part of what the school team's discussing is sort of that social aspect of not graduating with their peers, the social graduation can sort of take the wind out of the sails on that particular point.
The next question is ideas on how to improve executive functioning in kiddos that struggle.
If I could jump in on this one, I think it depends on what the child is actually struggling with. What was that? Oh, sorry, I'm getting feedback on my end. So I think you can start small, you know, little things in the home, get a chart for what are they supposed to do? What is their morning routine? What is their after school routine? Have them, you know, check off the list as they do their, you know, any part of their routine, same thing in the evening. You know, when it comes to school, really working with them to use their planner to, you know, have the teachers check in with them, you check in with them at home, you know, make sure visuals help a lot. I think that is probably the biggest piece of advice that we give our parents, is visuals that support whatever your child specifically needs. So whether that's, you know, hygiene and evening routines, whether it's getting themselves organized, packing their backpack, you know, we have visuals for pretty much anything that they might need. So I know that's a very broad answer. I don't know if, you know, Dr. Burke or Janet, you have more.
Katie, I'll hop on that too.
Yes, please.
You know, my hop on would be, if your kid is having trouble with executive function skill acquisition, you might also want to think about why that is. For example, their ADHD meds need adjusted, like you have visuals up, but they're not paying attention to them. Or they have OCD, or they're not, you know, getting enough routine, or both parents aren't on board saying the same messages. So it's the acquisition of the skills, but it's also, if there's a struggle with it, what's blocking the way. Some kids, you know, they have this powerful device in their pocket, which, you know, I read an article which was fascinating, that a kid's cell phone has more computing power than the Apollo moon mission did. And so they can set reminders and do those kind of things if they're an electronic kid, versus a paper planner, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd also say, what's the executive functioning in your house? What's the routines you have in your house? And so they can acquire them, not just with that child, but parents need to demonstrate them too.
Yeah, and now just add to that a couple of points. As someone who has ADHD but did not know until her son was diagnosed, you know, understanding what their executive functioning struggles are is so important. You know, like I struggle with time blindness, right? And sort of sleep, right? And that can really impact them throughout the day and their ability to execute successful executive functioning strategies. So understanding sort of the root of these things. The household thing is such a key point. Like, you know, I'm sort of the manager of the household, but I have to manage my own executive functioning stuff. And I have to be cognizant of what my kiddo with ADHD sort of needs and what's successful for him from an executive functioning standpoint. The one thing that I think is also very helpful is mirroring what they are doing at school to the extent that it's possible in the home setting. So if they have some visual schedules that they're implementing at school, if you can do something similar or mirror that at home, that consistency is really reinforcing.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, my student is in 6th grade and going into 7th grade for the 2023 school year. Should I be talking to teachers now about high school placement and strengths and weaknesses, goals, etc.?
Yes. I think it's a really good time to start talking. And, you know, Lashana, specifically to you, I know that you have had these very open conversations with the teachers, which is wonderful. I encourage all parents to have open conversations, you know, take feedback from the teachers and staff at the schools that your children are in. So I don't think it's too early at all. I will say a lot of our, you know, teachers in the younger grades may not know a lot about the available schools. So I think you could, you know, you could definitely reach out to me but really look at some of the administrators in your buildings to start to guide you in the direction to look at.
Katie, can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so a couple of things I would say is that the kids that I'm working with that are having some special needs, you know, they don't go on like a upward move like this.
Mhm.
It's sort of up and down and up and down and up and down a little bit. And so if your kid's in 6th grade, it's an opportunity to look at what skills do they need to start acquiring and I need to focus on. And you can build those into the IEP. And Janet can talk more about that, I'm sure, be it social or executive function, whatever it is. Because by the time they're, you know, this time of year in 8th grade, it is what it is. And remember, they're applying to high school halfway through the 8th grade year.
Mhm.
So you need to be thinking about what skills do they need earlier on in the process in looking at those. So it may change as they go through the process. I think it's something to consider. But please think about, you're always kind of looking at what can I do to help them build these skills, no matter which they are.
Mhm.
Yeah, the end goal is that they graduate and they are, you know, as well prepared for adulthood as possible. So that should always be a driving force in the goals that you're structuring and the accommodations that you're building. So while the IEP itself is written for a year, we should be thinking holistically about how we're preparing them for successful high school years and successful adult years. And again, as I called out earlier, balancing the need for fading towards independence with managing transitions. So middle school can involve 2 pretty quick transitions, right? You 6th, 7th, 8th grade, that's 3 years. You just spent several years in elementary school. So what can you fade successfully while managing those transitions?
Yeah, and please be careful and consider what Janet's saying, because it's huge. You know, I have kids that their academics look great, but the parents are spending hours with them every evening, reteaching them material and things like that. And so you have to be aware of where are they at, and again, where are they functioning? And as you fade supports, you know, what do they need and what can they function without?
Mm-hmm. And if you're spending hours reteaching your kid at night, then you need to have an IEP meeting because they're not getting enough support at school, probably.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Do private schools in general have intervention specialists on staff? I have made one phone call to a high school and was told that most do not.
I wouldn't say that most do not. I think it really depends on the school. I know of a good number of private or Catholic schools that do have intervention specialists on site. It just depends. Sometimes they're very limited in the services that they are able to provide. There might only be one intervention specialist for the entire high school. There might be multiple. It really just depends on the school that you are talking to.
One of the things that you can do is if you go to the Ohio Department of Education's website, You can search schools that are providers for the Autism or John Peterson Scholarship. So that would at least give you a starting point of schools, because you do need to have some services to be included. So they have an interactive website that you can search by county, and that would kind of give you at least a starting point. Next question. Are there any mentor or coaches to guide you through the whole process that we can hire?
Oh, boy.
Do you want this one, Jay?
Do you want
Or
me to say something about that?
Yeah.
let's hit us with it.
Not to be crass, but my dog's right next to me. His name's Al, and he could be a coach if he wants to, because there's no licensing to be a coach, no certifications. And so, you know, again, there's good coaches out there. There's people that offer services. You know, ask around. The people whose names pop up multiple times are going to be the people you want to get to in terms of this process, because there are a lot of people hanging a shingle up saying they're doing certain things. If you're doing coaching, that is, again, unregulated compared to psychotherapy, which is regulated. And just consider what you're trying to have your child do. If it's social coaching, if it's executive function coaching, again, ask around. And the biggest thing I can tell you is that whether you're working with a coach or therapist or whatever, you should have a treatment plan or an agreement about what you're working on. And you should be checking in on the progress of those sessions, because it shouldn't just be, well, I'm dropping my child off and they're doing this. You want to get updates as they're going through this, saying what's happening. Was that too crass, or that was okay?
I think that was good.
Yeah, and if,
And I think,
oh, sorry,
sorry,
Jane, go
Katie.
ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if the coaching you're looking for is in terms of navigating IEPs 504s, of course, that's something that we help families with. And there's, you know, a handful of other folks out there. It can be a little bit of a niche area. And if Mary Jo were here, she's a wonderful education advocate. So sometimes it's appropriate for a family to be working with an attorney, and sometimes it's appropriate for a family to be working with an advocate. And I think we do a really great job of analyzing that and getting you the right level of support. If what you're looking for is support navigating the IEP 504 behaviors, discipline in the school setting.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment on piggyback on Janet. One thing that I would say is, if you're using a firm like Janet's firm, you can, as a parent, and I don't want to speak for you, Janet, but you can, as a parent, come in and consult with them, and they can sit in the background. They don't have to be in a meeting. You're more educated walking in, and you can have Janet or Mary Jo like give you information so you're more informed, because it can be intimidating sometimes when you're sitting with a group of people, and more knowledge is power. But you don't have to play that card. You can just keep them in the background. And
yeah.
that's important to consider.
Yeah, and that is something we talk with our clients about when they come in for an initial consult and we get oriented with their case. We talk to them about what's the most logical path forward. Is it a case where we can provide some behind the scenes guidance? Is it a case where we really need to have a presence, at least at the outset? And that is like what I love about working for Frank Hickman and working with Mary Jo is, you know, we're very cognizant of balancing what's appropriate given the given that student's particular situation, and empowering. My goal is always that my parents come out of their time with us better informed and more empowered to navigate the system independently, because they can't always have me at their side, right?
And this is where I'd bring up form your team, because you know you'll find that better professionals, if it's not their bailiwick, will refer you to the people that know more about it. So you know they may be handling the legal part, and then they'll support you somewhere else in terms of directing you to whatever services that you need. I think that's important, because that's that form that team idea.
And if you're looking for,
And
oh, sorry, mentorship.
go ahead.
or
No,
coaching-
Kate, you do it.
No, that's okay. Mentorship or coaching as far as the high school application process and what you should be looking at. That's where I would turn to, the school administrators, here at JB, it would be the person that's in my position, or, any of the 8th grade teachers in any of the diocesan schools. We walk the parents through the process step by step. So, once we get to looking for high schools in the fall, shadow days, applications, we definitely take it one step at a time.
And the last thing I'll say about that, in terms of school meetings, when you have a student on an IEP, it is a parent right to invite people to the meeting. So maybe it's not me, maybe it's not an advocate, but it can be useful to have another set of ears and eyes in the room. It can be emotional and stressful and disorienting. It's not a process that we typically do, that parents are generally familiar with. So it can be helpful to have another person in the room, even if it's a friend that can just help you reflect on the meeting afterwards.
Thank you. Next question. Do you have any suggestions for convincing a reluctant child they need to get involved in an activity? Jay, I think that might be under your wheelhouse.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things about that. One is giving them some choice in the deal, is saying, we want you to do an activity. You can choose A or B, or you can find C. Rather than saying you have to do A or B, I think is important. I think telling them the reason that you want them to do that so that they're well-rounded. I think getting them in the right activity where they're going to fit, that was that have a life part. And if they're reluctant, another thing to do is, these are sometimes families that'll come into me and do a meeting or two, and the parents can get guidance too on how to work with the child and what their reluctance is. Now, by middle school and high school, they may have reluctance for some reason that you're not aware of. Maybe they don't physically feel they can do it. Maybe there's a mean kid in there that's been mean to them before. There may be a hidden agenda that you're not aware of. And so I would keep an eye out for that. And the last part I would say to this is also talk with the people that are doing the activity. Example, you can have Taekwondo where there's an instructor that doesn't have much patience for kids with special needs versus the right place, or, a drama instructor, a band instructor who's more sensitive to these things. And the school will often know, about this, and giving that person in charge of the activity a heads up to include the child and make them feel like they fit in can be super helpful. But the biggest thing is, if they're reluctant, what is that reluctance about? Nowadays, one of the biggest things is they'd rather sit on video games and just play. So that's a big fight that many families have.
And I would add to that, reaching out to the school team may be helpful as well, understanding how they're engaging with their peers in the school setting. Because again, that's not something we can replicate at home. We don't get to see that as parents. So what are there things they're gravitating towards, or peers that they're gravitating towards that may help you pinpoint some activities of interest? And then sometimes, depending on the student and their needs, we have the IEP team conduct an interest survey. This can be useful, for a variety of reasons if you're trying to gear them towards post high school life, but also trying to figure out how to engage that student socially. So that might be a useful tool as well.
Okay, thank you. Jay, I think this question will be for you also. Can you explain more about what the Perspectives Academy Plus is for older students and what is done to help them with their executive functioning?
Yeah, so what we found was we created this year, and it's gotten very popular very quick. And the concept was, well, let me start with the reason I started Perspectives Academy 10 years ago was there were kids that weren't behavior issues, they weren't severe autism, and so they were somewhere in the middle. They had mental health issues, they got picked on, they had anxiety, they had OCD. And so there needed to be a fit for them. And then what we found was that we were seeing kids in my practice that were graduating or ready to graduate, but maybe we're still on a 5th grade math level and they needed to continue their math. Maybe they need job skills. And when I'm talking job skills, it's not just doing the job, it's vocational readiness. It's being able to fit in a workplace. Maybe their social skills are still immature. And maybe their executive function is a problem. So what we do is we do an individual, they still have an IEP, most of our kids do. And they're working that IEP, but we're also rewriting often what's in that IEP to what that individual needs. Because it becomes real life. For example, if you have a job somewhere, and some of our kids have failed out, and that's why they've come to us, and you're at the Cleveland Clinic and you're late too many times, you get too many points, you're getting written up. So we're working on real life attributes to those kind of situations. Again, once your child is 18, if they graduate, there's very little out there. And so we can be supportive. Our kids could be on 5th grade math, but they might also be taking a college course online and getting support by our intervention specialist in our program. So it's very individualized to the students that we have in the program. They're working on independent living skills such as cooking, making lists for shopping. That's another way to do executive function skills, because if you leave out things, it doesn't work too well. So I could go on and on and on, but if you're interested, give us a call. We can give you a tour. But there is not many games in town for that. That's why we invented it. Because there's this sort of desert of opportunity. Maybe Janet can talk more about that. But they can put your child in a workplace setting, but if they don't have workplace skills, they often end up getting fired or not going to work or having problems. And Janet, I'm sure you've seen that a million times.
All right, next
Yeah,
question.
sorry, no, I was gonna say,
Sorry.
I don't have a bunch to add because I think that was pretty good. I think it's important to be purposeful about these IEPs, make sure they're not just academic focused. Early intervention is super key. So working on these skill sets that if we don't develop them and build good strategies, would get them in situations where they are getting fired from jobs later in life, right? So, and then, it is sometimes difficult to find, like sometimes what Jay said about like, that's the only game in town, right? Like difficult to find the right school setting for a certain student's needs. I've seen this with things like full day preschools for students that have needs, right? So if you can't find the perfect setting, making sure that the public setting is as good as it can be, and that requires good advocacy and really thinking about the goals and the skills that you're building. Are you asking a student to do something in a goal that they haven't actually learned to do, right? Like, are you asking a student to self-regulate, but they actually have learned, like they first need to be taught, they need to have some one-on-one time with a counselor to build that skill and then implement it. So just using the tools of the IEP as effectively in a strong parent advocacy way.
Yeah, I forgot to say just one more quick comment. Some of our individuals that are in our PA Plus program actually did graduate. So they don't have an IEP anymore that's valid, and their parents pay for the program. So the school district's not paying or anything like that. But oftentimes, if your forethought really helps rather than waiting for a problem afterwards.
Thank you. Next question. I want to have a special needs fair to help guide student and parents to pick the best high school for them. What do you feel we need to incorporate to make the student feel empowered during the process?
I think that's a really good question. And I think, obviously the first step would be inviting them and preparing them ahead of time to ask questions. If you have a high school fair with various high schools and various opportunities, I would have a wide variety there.
Yeah.
the vocational, some of the, maybe the local public settings, the local private settings, Catholic settings, but have them be prepared to ask questions when they go, so that they're just as involved as their parents. I know as parents, we have questions that we want answered, some of the more logistical and academic based questions. But the kids always want to know, what are the extracurriculars? What are the fun stuff that, the schools have to offer? So working with them to have some questions ahead of time, I think would be really beneficial.
Yeah, I would add, I've had kids do high school tours and I go, how'd your tour go? And they go, the food was really good. I like this high school better.
Always the food.
I'm like, what, is there anything else that you thought was important? No, but the food was really great and it's better than, wherever. So I think having them prepare their questions, and that's a good opportunity to get some of these individuals ready to be able to advocate for themselves. I have a lot of kids that have anxiety. We have a lot of kids in our program that have a super amount of anxiety. An example, they won't order in a restaurant. They won't call a pizza place to deliver. If you even do that anymore, I think you do it on an app now. Or Domino's, you can do it yourself and save $3. But the point being that don't forget about just the question, but the ability to go up to a person, look them in the eye, say, hi, my name's Jay. I'd like to ask you a question. Those are the skills that are prerequisite to asking the question. So it's important to kind of think about that whole picture.
Okay, thank you. Next question. A question about these webinars, because this one has been so informative. Are these open to the general public or only for JB families? All of our speaker series are open to the public, not just JB families. Hopefully, since you found this one to be so informative, you kind of spread the information, word of mouth, to get more people to attend. And also know that there will be a survey that goes out. So if there's topics that you're interested in, you can always add those and we can add them to the next round of speaker series.
I see people from my practice on here, so I can just also add, when we send out something, like we send out a Mad Mimi, which is our advertising, you can also forward those to other people or organizations. So from our end, please feel free to forward the announcements.
Okay. How can you delicately go about bringing up that you may notice some OCD tendencies to your child, especially if they don't seem aware of it? I'm going to say, Jay, that might be under your.
Yeah, it's my wing again. Huh?
Yeah.
So OCD is what I call the whack-a-mole problem. So if you ever played whack-a-mole in the arcade, like you get it down in one area, pops up in another area. So for example, today I have a kid that has to brush his teeth, tap it on the sink twice, count so many times, then put it in the toothpaste holder. And what it is he's got a whole routine in the morning that takes him almost an hour to get through the bathroom. So one of the things is to start talking about where it's interfering in their day. And that's a really important concept. And it's, this is tough because you don't want them to get embarrassed. You don't want them to get insulted. But if you don't get it patted down early, it can really become debilitating and the OCD can spread into other areas. So OCD generally is driven by anxiety. I see a lot of kids with OCD, and what I can tell you about that is they generally have a hidden worry that they're not telling you about. So if I don't touch this twice, or if I don't count even on an even number, this is going to happen. And it's really fear-based often. And there is a whole protocol to do with kids with OCD. And one thing that I recommend to parents, and this is a nice thing to kind of think about, is you could say, we'll go with you to a therapist because we as parents aren't sure how to handle this either. So let's go as a family together rather than saying you need treatment for OCD. And that's a much softer landing than just pegging it on the kid.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Is there any benefit to the new 4-year college programs that cost full tuition, but have the student graduate with a certificate and not a diploma? I know Kent and OSU offer this, and Cleveland State is starting theirs.
You want me to say something about it?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with.
So I'm very familiar with them. I've had kids do several of them. What you have to understand is that what are you trying to get out of that experience? So generally they're not getting a degree, they're getting a certificate. And what are they offering in the program? Kent's program has been sort of emerging, growing, changing as it's gone through sort of processes. I've had a kid in North Carolina. There's a lot of schools getting on the bandwagon with this. You also might want to look at the students. Remember what I said, the students are accepting and the students they're not accepting, because there can be a huge variation in the students that are accepted into these types of programs. At the end of it, and I have kids at the end and they have a certificate, that certificate so far really hasn't proven to be anything other than a certificate. It's more the skills that they're supposed to acquire and gain from the programs. You know, at some point, maybe that certificate will mean something, and I hope it does. I think that would be a good idea. I think the idea of integrating kids onto a college campus like that can have some really good prospects. But look at the program wisely and really spend your time, because there is a lot of money that you're going to pay for that program. And you have to decide, is your child the best fit for that program? Or is that program the best fit for your child?
Okay, thank you. All right, and then the last question so far is, do the Autism and John Peterson scholarships fund a student through age 22?
Janet, you going on that?
Yeah. Yes, they do. They do.
Yeah, and I would just add, just make sure you follow the rules with it. For example, if they have to do state testing, if you have to fill out certain things, make sure you do them, because it can get sticky if you don't follow all the rules. If you're not familiar with the rules, ask somebody who is, because if you make a mistake, you can lose your scholarship for that mistake.
And I would add to that, if you anticipate your school team will be reluctant about keeping your student on an IEP through age 22, just come prepared with good talking points about why you think that's appropriate.
Okay, those are all the questions that we had. Thank you.
So thank you all for your time this evening, and please look out for our survey, other topics that you can give us to provide some education around. And we so thank you for your time this evening. Have a wonderful evening.